What's up, it's Playstand, and today I'm going to be talking about some deck tech, some deck ideas for Voja, Jaws of the Conclave. I'm pretty sure it's Voja. I'm gonna say that. I'm just gonna say Voja because I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Anyway, it is one of the pre-release cards. It comes in your pre-release pack that you can't actually use during pre-release, which is a little confusing. But in this case, it's a cool card design, so I don't really mind too much. Anyway, Voja, Jaws of the Conclave, is 2, a red, a green, and a white. So that is, I already forgot, Naya, so it's Naya colors. And Voja, Jaws of the Conclave, is a legendary creature wolf. It has Vigilance, Trample, Ward 3. And whenever a Voja, Jaws of the Conclave attacks, put X 1/1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of elves you control, and then draw a card for each wolf you control. So a lot of people, myself included, when they find out about this card, they're really excited for it because you can do like wolves or elves or both or changelings or etc. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it, and it seems like a lot of fun. So this is why I'm making this video. Anyway, so I'm just going to walk you through. This is my current list. It's not super refined. It's kind of a list I threw together, and then I also have some cards in considering that are worth considering. But anyway, there's a lot of elves, just mana dorks, like Arbor Elf. They're elves, they're mana dorks. They're going to give you those 1/1 counters during combat. They don't need to be like attacking to get the counters either, so just having mana dorks out is gonna give you lots of value. So there's Armor Elf, Armorcraft Judge. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card for each creature with a 1/1 counter on it. So hopefully that'll be like at least a handful of cards or creatures. So get maybe a few cards, refill your hand. Ascendant Pack Leader enters with a 1/1 counter if you control a permanent with mana value 4 or greater. Whenever you cast a big spell, put a 1/1 counter on it. Unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of like big spells in this. Hello. She's getting cranky because she wants to eat, but it's too early. Anyway, unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of big spells in the list to give it those counters, but it will get the counters from the attack trigger. And it is just a decent wolf card to have. You'll notice, since it's wolves and not wolves and werewolves, your selection for wolves is going to be a bit more limited. But it's still not a bad card in the list. So, Beast Whisperer, self-explanatory. It's an elf, and when you cast a creature, you draw a card. Cemetery Prowler is a pretty good one. Whenever it enters or attacks, exile a card from a graveyard. Notice that it doesn't say up to, so you have to. Spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each card type they share with cards exiled with Cemetery Prowler. Really, if you don't want to exile cards, you can just have it enter, exile a creature, ideally, so your creatures cost less, because that's almost 40% of the deck, and then have your creatures cost 1 less, and it's a wolf that's going to draw you more cards when you go to attack with Voja. Delighted Halfling, unfortunately, isn't an elf, but it's just a really great mana dork. Druid of the Anima is a Naya elf mana dork, so that's nice to have. Elvish Harbinger, when it enters, search for an elf card, reveal, put it on top, and it adds a mana of any color. So if you have any really good value elves, you can search for that, and then it also just becomes mana dork afterwards. Mystic is a mana dork. Elvish Warmaster, whenever one or more elves enter, make a 1/1 elf. And then you can dump 7 mana into it to give elves +2/+2 and death touch until end of turn, to kind of try and swing big and wide, maybe try and end the game or at least kill one person. Same thing with Azuri Renegade Leader. You can regenerate another target elf if someone tries to remove some of your nice value elves, or you can give your elves +3/+3 and trample until end of turn. Also can be game or at least opponent ending. Ferocious Pup. It's a 3 cost. When it enters, it makes another wolf. Which the card itself isn't great, but in this list you're essentially paying 3 for 2 wolves, and don't worry about it being a 0/1 because it is going to get those counters when you go to combat. Findhorn Elves, just a mana dork. Gyre Sage, it has evolve. you really don't care too much about the evolve ability because it's going to get those free counters during combat, and then it taps for green for each 1/1 counter on it. So again, you really don't need to evolve it, you just get those free counters during combat, and then it taps for more mana. Holohenge Overlord. At the beginning of your upkeep, for each creature you control that's a wolf or werewolf, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. So it essentially doubles the amount of wolves you have each upkeep, which is pretty great, especially, if you need to draw cards. Even if he's the only wolf, even if you just have him and Voja, it's going to be 2, then 4, then 8, etc., etc. And then it also gives you those 2/2s you can swing with if you want to keep him safe. Immerwolf, it's a pretty classic. Other wolf and werewolf creatures you control get +1/+1. We don't really have any werewolves in this, although you could run Tovolar, because Tovolar says whenever a wolf or werewolf deals damage, you can draw a card. He's just a wolf lord, which is pretty nice to have. Pirius Perfect, it's an elf lord, and then you can pay a green, tap it to put another elf out. It gives you more elves for more counters. Incubation Druid, add 1 mana of any type that has land you control could produce. If it has a 1/1 counter on it, which it probably will, you can add 3 mana of that type. You can pay 5 to put counters on it, but really you shouldn't need to do that. It'll just get those counters for free. Draga Warcaller is another really cool one in this list. It has multi-kicker. It enters with a 1/1 counter for each time it was kicked, and then other elf creatures you control get +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on it. And you really don't have to kick it if you don't have the mana for it, because it's just for each counter. It's not necessarily for each time it was kicked, because if you go to combat and put 3 or 4 counters on it, suddenly your elves are getting another additional +3 or +4. Kami of Whispered Hopes just gives you an additional counter when you add counters, and it also adds mana of any color where X is its power. It's not an elf or wolf, but it is still going to get those free counters during combat from Voja, so it's a pretty strong card in the list. Leafcrown Visionary is another elf lord. Whenever you cast an elf spell, you can pay green if you do draw a card. So it's an elf, it lords other elves, and you can potentially draw cards when you cast more elves. Llanowar Elves, pretty self-explanatory. Mirror Entity is a shapeshifter and has changeling, so it's going to count as both an elf and a wolf for Voja purposes. And you can pay X, and until end of turn, creatures you control have base power, toughness XX, and gain all creature types. You're not really going to be, I don't foresee people really dumping mana into that to make the creatures big. It's mainly just, they're all going to be wolves, they're all going to be elves, and then you're going to draw and make a bunch of counters, blah, blah, blah. Packsong Pup. It gets counters at the beginning of combat, and when it dies, you gain life equal to its power. Not an amazing card, but it's still a decent wolf in the list. It gets counters from itself. It's going to get counters from Voja, and then it can gain you some life when it dies. Priest of Titania is great. Tap, add green for each elf on the battlefield, which is going to be at least 1 because it counts itself. Get out of here. It's not time to eat. It's not time. It's too early. It's like 45 minutes until she eats, and she's being spoiled. Anyway, Primal Adversary. When it enters, it's essentially multi-kicker. If you do blah 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 blah, put that many counters on it, and then up to that many lands become 3/3 wolf creatures with haste that are still lands. It's a bit of a weird card, but it's gonna make your lands blah blah blah. Yeah, they remain lands, and they remain the wolf creatures. It's not until end of turn. So it's essentially going to give you additional 3/3 wolves for 1 and a green when it enters, if you pay the mana cost at least. Pyreheart Wolf, when it attacks, each creature you control can't be blocked this turn except by 2 or more creatures. So it's like pseudo menace, which is pretty good because we want to swing and we want to hit people. It's got Undying. That's not really super relevant. Realm Walker, it's a changeling, so again it counts as a wolf and elf for our purposes. Choose a creature type, look at the top, cast spells from the top of the chosen type. You're probably going to end up picking elves, although if you're leaning harder into wolves or changelings, etc., you could pick those too. Just a pretty strong card regardless of how you build the commander. Rishkar, Pima Renegade. When it enters, put 1/1 counters on stuff. Each creature with a counter on it has tap add green. So again, all your creatures are going to be getting free counters when you swing. So they should be able to tap for mana too. Selvala, great elf mana dork. You can potentially draw cards if you have the biggest creature, but it's just gonna, oh my god, it's just gonna tap and add a bunch of mana, and it's an elf. Shalain Halar. Whenever one or more 1/1 counters I put on a creature you control, it deals that much damage to target opponent. At the beginning of combat, if you have like 5, let's say, elves, including Shalain Halar, you're going to be putting 5 counters on each of those creatures. So it's going to be dealing a ton of damage. It's just pretty strong. Good synergy with the commander. Spring Moon Druid enters. You may sack land. If you do, find up to 2 basics. It's an elf, and it's going to kind of sort of ramp you. Torian Mauler, another changeling. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you can put a 1/1 counter on it. So it's a changeling that's going to get pretty huge in a commander game. And then Tolsimir is, he's the guy who owns, partners, companion with Voja. Unfortunately, I was looking at the Tolsimir cards, including the new one, and I wasn't really impressed with any of them. This is the best one that I saw. When he enters, make a Voja token, legendary 3/3 green and white wolf creature. Whenever a wolf enters, you gain 3 life, and it can fight up to 1 thing. So if your wolf is big enough, you can have it fight something, or not. But it's an elf that makes a wolf, so I don't think it's too bad in the list. There's Wandering Wolf, which is a really neat card I didn't really know about before looking into this list. Creatures with power less than Wandering Wolf's power can't block it, and then since you're getting a bunch of counters, it's going to be pretty hard to block if it survives combat or 2. Wirewood Channeler, same thing as Priest of Titania, except it can be any color for elves in play. Wood Elves enters, you find a forest. Pretty solid. Sorceries, Cultivate, classic ramp. Damning Verdict, destroy all creatures with no counters on them. All our creatures should ideally be safe, and then it's supposed to be a one-sided board wipe. Maybe a couple of your opponent's creatures will live, but for the most part, it's going to be vastly more beneficial to us. Some more ramp. Instance, Beast Within, classic commander removal. Flawless Maneuver, it's just going to protect our creatures for free if we have Voja out. Heroic, also going to protect our board. Inspiring Call, you draw a card for each creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it, and those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. So it should refill your hand and protect your creatures for 2 and a green. Pretty good. Shields of Velazavel is an interesting one. It counts as it's a Kindred instant shapeshifter with Changeling. So the spell counts as an elf and wolf spell for anything that cares about that, at least. Creatures target player controls get +0/+1, don't really care. But they also gain all creature types until end of turn, so it's going to give you a really big Voja trigger when you go to combat and when you swing with it. And then there's just Swords to Plowshares, solid commander removal. Artifacts, we have Arcane Signet, Lightning Greaves. Lightning Greaves and Swifties are going to be great because they're going to give it Hexproof and Shroud and Haste. Because you want your commander to be out, you want him to be hasty so he can swing, and you want him to have Hexproof or Shroud so he can get targeted a little less. Maskwood Nexus is another great one for this deck, because creatures you control are every creature type, including creature spells and you control and creature cards you own. So it's going to make all your elves wolves, all your wolves elves, and so on. So it's going to just essentially double up on that commander value. Ozolith, you get extra counters, and you can move counters or activate and add just counters. Soul Ring, Swifties. The Ozolith, you can move your counters around, so just synergizes nicely with counters. And then one of the popular themes in the deck is extra combats, because that's the whole game plan of the deck, is to go to combat, swing their commander, and get value. So there's Aggravated Assault. You can pay 5 mana to get an additional combat and untap all your creatures. All Will Be One is great. Whenever you put one or more counters on a permanent or player, it deals that much to target opponent or creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. I believe it's a 2-card combo with Shalai and Halar, but that's not really the idea here. It's just if you put a bunch of counters, same thing with Shalai and Halar, when you put a bunch of counters, you're going to get a bunch of damage from the card. Elven Chorus. You can look at the top card, you can play creatures from the top, and creatures can tap for mana. And again, since creatures are almost like 40% of the deck, you should be doing that a lot. Guardian Project, whenever a non-token creature enters, if it doesn't have the same name, which it probably won't because it's singleton commander, draw a card. So it should be a pretty free card draw. Hardened Scales, additional 1/1 counters, which is great for the deck. Howlpack Resurgence, your wolves, and it's just wolves for this really. Your wolves are going to get +1/+1 in trample, so should be able to hit a little more. Miles Aria, I'm a little on the fence on, to be honest, because it seems a little win more. But it says at the beginning of your upkeep, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control, which is already pretty nice by itself. I gotta be honest though. Then if you control a creature power 5, only if you control a creature power 5 or greater, gain 10 life if you control a creature power 10 or greater. Then you win the game if you control a creature power 20 or greater. This is the first ability is pretty decent in the deck, although when people hear about the last ability, they're probably going to end up targeting you, even though it's not super likely that it's actually going to happen. But it is a nice option. Ranger class synergizes really well with the deck. When it enters, you make a wolf, which is good. And then level 2, whenever you attack, put a 1/1 counter on target attacking creature. It's only one counter, but it still does have synergy. And then level 3, you can look at the top card and cast creature spells from the top. We like those in the deck. Rhythm, your creature spells can't be countered, which is great. And non-token creatures control have right. They enter with a 1/1 counter or haste, which is great. You want counters or haste, both work well. And then as far as lands, the mana base is pretty basic for these colors. There's only 32 lands. You've got a bunch of elf mana dorks, so I don't think you need much more than that. There is Path of Ancestry, which is great for kindred decks, and then Kessig Wolf Run kind of just fits the deck nicely and can make something a bit bigger. So yeah, there's that. Like I said, there is also the option of having additional combat, so something like Aggravated Assault I think would be good. Bloodthirster is another popular option I've seen. Whenever it deals damage, you get another combat. You just can't attack a player the Bloodthirster at least can't attack a player you've already attacked this turn, or it's already attacked. But you should get at least 1 or 2 extra combats maybe. As far as these ones are concerned, like Godo and Aurelia have pretty similar effects, but I don't think they're great in the list. It's literally just an extra combat on a creature, which isn't bad, but I think you have better options like the Aggravated Assault. Same thing with Karlach. But I do think Relentless Assault is pretty good because it's just 4 on a sorcery. Savage Beating can win you some games. Can give them double strike or get an additional combat, or entwine and get both. Seize the Day is okay. It does give you the additional combat and main phase, but it's only untapping 1 creature. So that's why I'm like, it's okay. Waves of Aggression and World at War do pretty much the same thing. You can potentially cast them again, so I think they could be solid in the list. Then Zariel. I think Zariel could be pretty solid in a Voja deck as well. You really don't care about the 0 ability, but the +1 is going to give your creatures +1 and haste until end of turn, which is pretty strong because we want to just swing our stuff. And then the -6 is at the beginning of the first combat, you get an additional combat. And you really only need her out 3 turns. You +1 again, and then -6, and that's all you need. You should be set from there. So I think Zariel could also be pretty solid. And then as far as cards I'm considering, Anara is going to give your commander, it's a wolf, and it's going to give your commander indestructible on your turn, so you can swing pretty safely. Bramblewood Paragon. You don't really care too much about the first ability, but each creature with a 1/1 counter has trample, and he's an elf. so your creatures are just gonna have trample. Same thing with Kodama Modified, which cares about counters. They're gonna have trample. Do they have trample? Yeah, they have trample, and then whenever they deal combat damage, which for each one, by the way, whenever a modified creature, you can find a basic land, so hopefully should ramp you a bunch and get some cards out of your deck. Wolf Skull Shaman, like, it fits the deck so well. You can look at the beginning of your upkeep. You can see if the top card shares a creature type. It's probably just going to be elf. I don't think there are really a whole lot of shamans in the deck that aren't already elves anyway. If it does share a creature type, you can put a 2/2 wolf in, so it's an elf, and it can potentially make some wolves. Then there's Howling Moon. Beginning of combat, one of your wolves is going to get bigger, and then whenever an opponent casts their second spell, make another wolf. And then there's Uncivil Unrest. Non-token creatures have Riot, so enter with haste or a 1/1 counter. And if a creature with a 1/1 counter on it would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that instead. So that's probably going to be all your creatures when you go to combat with Voja. So it can do some crazy damage. I really should find room for some of these in the main list. But yeah, that's my deck tech for Voja. I'm really excited for this. I've already ordered a bunch of cards for it. And then I know a lot of other people that I've talked to are also excited and want to build it. So if you're trying to figure out what to do with the list, hopefully this video gave you some ideas. But it's pretty nice because you can do a lot of stuff with it. You can do more elves, more wolves, more changelings, etc., etc. So yeah, hopefully this video helped you out. Hopefully you enjoyed it, found it a little informative. But in any way, I'll see you later.